This war killed more people than World War I. Historians estimate between 20 and 70 million people died in one conflict, in one country, in 14 years. And you have probably never heard its name. It didn't start with an army. It started with one man, a farmer's son, a failed student, a nobody. And when it was over, China would never be the same again. This is the story of Hong Xiuquan and the deadliest civil war in human history. In 1850, China should have been impossible to defeat. The Qing Dynasty ruled over 430 million people. 1 out of every 3 humans alive lived inside its borders. Its armies stretched from the South China Sea to the edge of Central Asia. Its emperors sat in the Forbidden City, a palace so vast it had nearly 1,000 buildings. On paper, China was the greatest empire on earth. But paper can lie. Behind the palace walls, the empire was rotting from the inside. Start with the numbers. In 1500, China had around 100 million people. By 1850, it had 430 million, a 300% increase in 3 centuries. The land hadn't grown, the food hadn't kept up. Farmers who once had a field now had a strip of dirt. Then their sons divided that strip. Then their sons divided it again. Generation after generation, the same land was cut into smaller and smaller pieces until entire families were farming plots too tiny to survive on. Millions of people with no land, no work, and no way out. The government that was supposed to help them? It was stealing from them. The Qing rulers were Manchu, not ethnically Han Chinese, the group that made up the overwhelming majority of the population. They had conquered China in 1644. 200 years later, many Han Chinese still resented them as foreign occupiers. And the occupiers weren't even competent. Local officials pocketed tax money meant for flood control and road repairs. Military commanders bought their ranks instead of earning them. The famous 8-banner armies, the warriors who had conquered China, had spent so many generations in peacetime comfort that they could barely fight. To move up in this world, you took the Imperial Civil Service examination. Around 2 million men sat these exams. Fewer than 4% passed. If you failed, your future disappeared. Then, on top of everything else, came the opium. British traders were flooding China with cheap opium from India. By the mid-1800s, historians estimate tens of millions of Chinese were regular users. Entire villages were addicted. The silver that should have stayed in China was flowing out, to Britain, to pay for the drug. The Qing fought back. In 1839, they seized and destroyed over 1,000 tons of British opium. Britain sent warships. The First Opium War lasted 3 years. China lost. The 1842 Treaty of Nanjing forced China to open its ports, hand over Hong Kong, and pay enormous penalties. The greatest empire on earth had just been humiliated by a trading company with a navy. Then, in 1846, famine hit, and again in 1849. Floods destroyed the harvest across southern China. Peasants starved. Some sold their children to survive. Tax collectors still came. If you couldn't pay, they took what you had left. In the southern province of Guangxi, one of the poorest, most unstable corners of China, rival ethnic groups were fighting each other over scraps of land. Violence was becoming daily life. This was China in 1850. 430 million desperate people, a government that couldn't protect them, an army that couldn't fight, and no outlet for any of it. All it needed was a spark. His name was Hong Xiuquan, born in 1814 in a village in Guangdong province. Son of a farmer, Hakka, an ethnic minority already treated as outsiders in their own land. He was smart, ambitious. He had exactly one path out of poverty: passed the exam. Hong studied for years. He sat the imperial examination. He failed. He studied harder. He sat it again. He failed again. In 1837, after his third failure, Hong walked home, went to bed, and didn't get up for weeks. He lay there delirious with fever, experiencing vivid hallucinations he would later describe in detail. A journey to a heavenly realm, a powerful father figure who handed him a sword, a brother who fought alongside him against demons. He recovered. He decided the visions meant nothing. He sat the exam a fourth time. He failed again. That was the moment something broke inside Hong Xiuquan. He was in his late 20s. He had spent his entire life working toward one goal. He had failed it 4 times. The world he had been promised, the world where hard work and intelligence were rewarded, had rejected him. He had nothing. Then, sometime around 1843, he found a pamphlet, a set of Christian missionary writings he had been given years earlier and never fully read. He read them now. And as he read, the hallucinations he'd had 6 years earlier suddenly looked completely different. The father figure, he decided, was God. The brother who had fought beside him, he decided, was Jesus. Which meant Hong Xiuquan was supposedly the younger brother of Jesus. Chosen by heaven, sent to save China. Was it genuine belief? Was it the conclusion of a man so broken by failure that he needed a different story about himself? Historians still debate it. What nobody debates is what he did next. Hong began to preach. His cousin Feng Yunshan helped him organize. They went to Guangxi, the most desperate, most restless province in China, and started recruiting. Their message was built for people who had nothing left to lose. God sees you. The Manchu rulers are demons. A new kingdom is coming where all land will be shared equally, where women will have rights, where opium will be banned, where the corrupt will face justice. To a starving farmer in Guangxi, this wasn't religion. This was the only hope anyone had offered them in years. They came by the thousands. By 1850, Hong's movement, called the God Worshippers Society, had tens of thousands of followers. They were buying gunpowder. They were training. When the Qing sent soldiers to stop them, the God worshippers fought back, and the Qing soldiers ran. 1851. Hong Xiuquan becomes a king. He stood before his followers in the village of Jinqian in Guangxi province and made an announcement. The Qing Dynasty was over. In its place, the Taiping Rebellion, the heavenly kingdom of great peace. He named himself the Heavenly King. 5 commanders became kings of the 4 cardinal directions. 3 years earlier, this man had been hiding from debt collectors. Now he was declaring a new dynasty. The Qing didn't take it seriously. They should have. Later that year, Hong's army, now around 60,000 strong, defeated Qing forces in engagement after engagement and seized the city of Yongan. The Taiping army was unlike anything China had seen. Soldiers wore uniforms, red jackets, blue trousers, and grew their hair long. The Qing called them the long hairs. The nickname was meant as mockery. The long hairs didn't mind. Women served in their own separate battalions with their own commanders. In 19th century China, this was almost unimaginable. They fought anyway. The Qing sent more soldiers. Those soldiers lost too. Hong's army broke out of Guangxi and began marching north. Every city they passed through, more people joined. Displaced miners, starving farmers, men with criminal records and nothing to protect. All of them folded into the Taiping ranks. By September 1852, when they besieged the city of Changsha, the army had grown to 120,000. Changsha held. They moved on. They pushed north to the Yangtze River, the great artery of China, and turned east. In December 1852, they captured Wuchang, one of the most important cities on the Yangtze. After Wuchang, estimates put the Taiping army at around 500,000 soldiers, 500,000 people marching under Hong's banner. The Qing's professional forces collapsed in front of them. Some entire garrisons surrendered without fighting. This was the empire that was supposed to be impossible to defeat. 2 years earlier, Hong Xiuquan had been a failed student with nothing. Now his army stood outside Nanjing, one of the great cities of China, home to around 500,000 people. They laid siege on March 8, 1853. 11 days later, the gates fell. Hong didn't just capture a city, he renamed it Tianjin, the heavenly capital. And for the millions of people who now lived under Taiping control, historians estimate around 30 million, he issued a constitution. All land would be divided equally among the people. Women were formally declared the equals of men. Foot binding, the practice that had crippled Chinese women for centuries, was banned. Opium was banned. The Taiping issued their own calendar. For people who had spent their entire lives at the bottom of the Qing hierarchy, this was revolutionary. Not a promise of revolution, an actual revolution. China now had two governments. But then Hong did something that would haunt everything that followed. He walked into his palace, and he didn't really come back out. He left the governing to his inner circle. He surrounded himself with concubines, a direct violation of everything he preached to his followers. He began issuing proclamations in increasingly elaborate religious language that only he fully understood. The man who had built this movement on discipline and fire was letting both go cold. His generals were still fighting, but the king was disappearing. The Taiping immediately launched two major expeditions. A northern expedition sent around 50,000 soldiers toward Beijing. For a few weeks, the Qing court genuinely believed the capital might fall. The question hanging over every general, every official, every person in China was the same. Could these long hairs actually win?